journalist. I'm here to interview Mrs. Rivera. I'm gonna ask you a few questions about your country of origin. Where are you originally from, and what are some details about your country?
Okay, my name is Oslady Rivera, and I'm originally from Cuba. I was born there in 1978 in Cárdenas, Matanzas. Cárdenas was the town, Matanzas is the province. It's like a state, and Cuba is the country. I was born in a communist country. So for many years, I didn't know what was going on. You know, of course, at home, my parents always talked about, you know, the government and how things were working out and not working out. And eventually, when I was about 16 years old, my mom and dad, you know, were talking about leaving the country, that they weren't happy. They knew that my brother and I didn't have a future if we stayed in Cuba. So they decided they were going to look for a boat, try to buy a boat, and we were going to escape. So in '94, we ended up, my father bought a boat, and we ended up leaving in the middle of the night. Nobody knew except for my family. We were able to say goodbye to my grandparents and a few of my aunts and uncles. We left in the middle of the night and got on our way to the USA.
Okay. What do they do for what do you do for a living here?
I went to school. So when I came here, I was 17. I finished high school in Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle, my uncle's my dad's brother, he came back with the Peter Pan program. So he married and ended up staying in the United States. And when we left Cuba, he became our sponsor. So while we were waiting in Guantanamo Bay in a refugee camp, he, you know, the government processed us and did our fingerprints and everything. And because we had sponsors here, we were able to come a little bit faster than other Cubans that were in a refugee camp. So as soon as we got to the United States, in Miami, they gave us ID cards and working permits for my parents. Then we flew to Pennsylvania, and my uncle was waiting for us, so I was able to go back to school, finished high school. Then I went to Penn State for my bachelor's degree. Then I went back to school for nursing. So I became a registered nurse eventually, and I worked for several years until I met my husband. We got married, had 2 boys, and then I've been a stay-at-home mom for the last almost 8 years.
Okay. How old were you when you originally left Cuba?
I was 16. Yeah.
Did you have any job before you left?
No, not back at home. I was just in school full time.
Other than like fleeing the country, why else did you leave why else did you go to the United States?
Well, it was I guess for my parents, it was a decision in the process for many years. My mom always says how back in the early '80s, she used to tell my dad, you know, this it's not good. This government is not good. They control our lives. You know, they don't let us progress. You know, when Fidel took over back in '59, my mom's dad used to own a lumber yard business. So the government officials came into his house. He had it in the back basically, and he had a few company trucks, nothing major, but they came in and took all of his tools. They took his company trucks, and they said, this is for the people now. So my grandpa was, you know, just a low middle class, you know, carpenter trying to make his business work when the government came in back in 1960. And they started confiscating all of his goods and everything he had worked all his life to obtain, basically. And like him, there were many Cubans that were taking their lands from, their factories, their businesses. So my mom lived through that, and from the beginning she knew that Fidel and, you know, his people were not
So what was it like differently than in Cuba? What was like the culture shock when arriving in the United States?
So when I came here, there were many things that were different. Starting with the language, I didn't know any English. My brother was our interpreter, translator with paperwork, interviews. So the language was a big thing, especially since we came from Cuba to practically straight to Pennsylvania. You know, we stopped at Miami to get our ID cards and paperwork. But the very next morning, we were on our first flight out to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where my aunt and uncle, our sponsors, were waiting for us. So the language, the music, the food, the way people dressed, you know, the cold weather, not coming from Cuba, I don't think it gets lower than 50 degrees Fahrenheit back at home. So that was all a big shock. Trying to make new friends being a teenage girl at 17 years old.
Yeah. Did you, what are some customs and traditions from your country?
We have quite a few things that even to today I keep it, you know, I keep at home, like some phrases in Spanish that I'll even use with the boys or my husband. The food is a big part of our home life here at home. My husband, even though he was born here, he loves Cuban food, and he always tells me the best Cuban restaurant is here at our house. So the food, I like to read poetry. So I have some books from back home. There's one poet in particular. His name is Jose Marti, and I like to read his poetry. So I keep that, and I even read it to the boys sometimes, even though they don't understand all the words in Spanish. So yeah.
Did you start back going to school in the United States when you came?
Yes. So I left Cuba when I was 16, spent about 6 months in a refugee camp. And by the time I made it to the U.S., I was like a week later, I turned 17. So I had finished 11th grade back home, and I got to Pennsylvania on a Friday. My uncle's like, don't think that you're taking a vacation. You're going back to high school right away. So that Monday I started, it was February, so whatever was left of 11th grade, which was, a lot of it was a review for me, but it was good because I didn't know the language. So it gave me a few months to get acclimated with the language, the culture, you know, the system in general. Mm-hmm.
How is it different than rather in Cuba, the school system?
One of the differences that I noticed is that, or at least then, this was 95 in Pennsylvania, you had electives. Back home in Cuba, there's no such thing. You have to take all the sciences since you're in middle school. So I was taking biology, chemistry, physics, math, you know, since I was like in 6th grade. There was no option that you take just physics or chemistry or bio. You know, you have to take all the sciences. You know, history according to our government, Spanish, which would be, you know, Spanish literature, English literature. So some of the things, you know, like the sciences would be practically the same. And that kind of made it easier because a lot of the science words or scientific words are very similar to Spanish. But yeah, there were in Cuba, whatever you get assigned, you have to take. Here, you could pick and choose.
So, like you said, history, according to the government, how was that in Cuba? Like, was it propaganda much, or?
Yeah, a lot of propaganda. A lot of the things are left out, and there's no really way to look at things. Like, even to this day in Cuba, people have very limited access to the internet. So even just the news, you know, now they will They will change things. They will report only their truth, their truth. They will report what's convenient to them. So growing up, we always got what they wanted us to hear. And like I said, there was like no way to confirm that was true or not, because we didn't have access to the internet and other resources.
Okay. Hello. It was very easy for me to talk to Mrs. Rivera about her personal life. I lived next to her for the past 9 years, and I didn't even know she was from Cuba originally. I learned a lot from this interview. I learned a lot about the culture of Cuba and its people. And Mrs. Rivera was 16 when she left Cuba, and so she left to escape a communist government. I'm almost 16. I couldn't imagine ever having to go in those terrible conditions to escape and gain my freedom. So yeah.